This here is what we're going to build in this video, and it's basically two different types of scrub-based parallax animations, so let's get started. Alrighty, so in this video, we are going to be creating what you just saw, and what we want to do is I'm going to link, if you're watching this on YouTube, because I'm making this particular lesson video as a part of the course free on YouTube, watch in the YouTube description, there's a CodePen link for the before state and the after state of this project. This right here is the before state. There's no HTML markup as it pertains to the layout. And so that's what we're going to focus on now, along with JavaScript. The only JavaScript we have is just the boilerplate code for the smooth scroll library, Linus, which, trust me, smooth scroll with this type of effect, the scrolling effect, really just adds a lot of interest to the design rather than just stopping right when you stop scrolling. You don't have to have smooth scroll, but that's what I'm using, and I'm also importing that. If I zoom up with my zoom tool, and we'll see we have right here, this is the Linus smooth scroll CDN link right there. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is get the HTML ready for this, and it's actually super simple. And what we're going to do is, let me get up my reference code, and yeah, so we're going to start with an empty section. So if I zoom up here, type in section, we've got our empty section. This gives us something just enough room to scroll to see the effect. And then we're going to have another section with a class of space, and this is where all of the magic happens. There's also going to be another empty section underneath so that we can continue scrolling past it to demonstrate the effect. So we're going to have an H1 that simply says cyberspace. And that's literally all we have to do for the HTML. Even though each individual letter is moving up and down, we're going to use the split type JavaScript library that will essentially grab this H1 element and then split each character it finds up into its own div element, essentially. And that's what allow us to, as a class, to target those, and then we can randomly change the Y value. We're also going to have our 4 images that are part of the gallery. And so that source is going to be images /space1.jpg. I'm just going to type space for the alt, Control Shift down 4 times, or however many times you want, 2, 3, and 4. And that's all we have for the HTML. So now if I switch gears and we go to our Sass, and I am currently watching the Sass file, we're not going to spend time writing everything from scratch, but there's only really just a few rule sets. So the first one is just going to be box sizing, border box on all. We're also going to have a body element. The body element, simple. We just have a margin of 0, height of 100 viewport height, font family Bebas Neue, font weight 400, color black. We're also going to have our section, our H1 element, and then the images. That, I'm just going to paste that whole section in, and we'll just quickly go over it. So let's hide this, go up to the top. So first we have our section. We're using a height 100 viewport height, so that's going to apply to all 3 sections that we have. We're going to have a position relative, display grid, place content center. This right here, this display grid, place content center, will take that H1 element and center it horizontally and vertically within the section. And the H1 element, we're doing a font size, clamp, and letter spacing. And then each of the images, we're making those position absolutes, a z-index of -1 so that we can see the actual text. Aspect ratio 1:1, object fit cover with 11%. Okay, now we're taking each one of those 4 that it finds, and we're just using the top and left values because they're position absolute to just put them on, different areas. Number 2, I put z-index 1 because I thought it would be cool to overlap just one of those images over the actual H1 element. And that's it. So if we save this, make sure you're watching your Sass file and you right-click Open with Live Server if you want to go that route. We'll see that if I go to my code, the browser here. That's not it. That's the finished version. This is what we look like right here. This is what our page currently looks like without any type of JavaScript outside of the smooth scroll. All right, so now we want to animate these things in obviously 2 different ways. The images are doing something different, and then the cyberspace is doing something entirely different as well. So let's go ahead and define some of our JavaScript properties now that our HTML and CSS is done. So over here, we're just going to create a const of heading, a document of query selector, H1. So we got our H1. heading split is going to be new split type heading. All right, so right there, split type, this is where this is coming from. This is the CDN for the split type JavaScript library. And this is how you use it. So we grab the H1 element and then we pass it in as a new split type. Very simple. And you'll see how this comes into play in a second. Now let's get all of our images. So document, or instead of using this, since we're using the Greenstock animation platform, which is included right here at the very top import, we're going to go ahead and use a utility, gsap.utils.toArray, because we have multiple images, and we're just going to specify the image element. And so that takes these all and puts them into an array, all four of these. Okay. After that, what we want to do is we want to essentially get access to all the letters created by split type right here. All right, so if I do a console log of heading split and save that and go back to our browser and hit F12, we'll see we have this right here, X. So if we open this up and we look at the characters, we have a div. Here's what it's doing essentially. It's taking this H1 element, it's inserting a parent class called div class line because it's simply one line. You can have multiple lines, that's why they do that. There's also words, you can have multiple words of course, and then we have characters. It's only finding one word because we simply have cyberspace, that's it. And then we have each character is accessible, as you can see here as I hover over these, in their own div elements. All right, very important to understand that. So let's get a reference by creating a property called const letters equals heading.query selector all, and we'll just grab char. And that class char is created by split type with each of those individual elements. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we are going to, before we iterate over each one of those letters that we just defined, and by the way, this is for the heading element where the Y% value of each of the letters is changing based on scroll. We're going to create a function, and this function, we just type in get random. Actually, I'm probably not going to sit here and describe this just because it's a random function and it's a helper function essentially. So what we do is just right here, get random. This is how we use it. We put a minimum number and a maximum number, and it simply just does some math random just to give us a number that falls between the minimum and maximum, a random number. Okay. Now what we could do is we want to iterate over each of the letters. So we're going to say letters.for each, letter and index. And inside of here, we want to create a constant that we can reference. So we're going to call it something like random Y% equals, now we're going to call our get random function. And we're going to pass in a value of 70 and 1100. And I found out those were, for my purposes, that's what I like the most. You can tinker with those to see how to adjust the height of the displacement on the y-axis of each of those individual letters. So now that doesn't do anything itself. We just have a const where it's storing this information. So now we're going to use Greenstock. So gsap, we're going to, not set, sorry. We're going to use the from to method. You could use from, you could use to, or from to. From to gives you most control because it allows you to define the initial state along with the end state of each of those characters. And what I mean state is basically the CSS properties that you want to define. So from to, we're going to say our letter. And what we're going to say is Y% is going to be hyphen negative random Y%. Now, you can remove this hyphen right there, that little negative sign, and it will make the displacement of the letters on the y-axis in the opposite direction. So just experiment with both of those if you wish. And we're also going to make them opacity 0. All right, so that's the initial from. This is the starting state. All right. Then what we want to do is put a comma after this first object, and maybe for better readability we can do this. we're going to add another object, and this is to. So this is the from right here, and then the to, these two letters, is right here in this object. Hopefully that makes sense. So now we want it to go where? Well, we want it to go to the original position. So we just simply say y% 0. Then opacity 1. Now we set up our scroll trigger. Okay, the scroll trigger is going to be, the trigger property itself is going to be heading. Now remember, heading is defined up here with query selector H1, so that we're just defining that as the element that will kind of dictate when the y% value, all this stuff right here that we're defining, when it will start to animate essentially. You can make that pretty much any element on the DOM if you wish. So we're going to say start and top bottom, which simply means the top of the when the top of the heading hits the bottom of the viewport, if that makes sense. And then we also have end, bottom, center. And then scrub true. This part's very important because this makes it based an animation that's not based on time or duration. It's based on your scroll distance. So it's a scroll animation. Okay. So let's zoom out of there. Let's save this and see what happens so far. There we go. So let's get this out of here. And what's cool is if I refresh this, they're random. So every time somebody visits your page and they encounter this effect, it's going to be unique, at least in the idea that, you know, each one of these letters is just randomly coming from different areas. Now, if I remove that negative value, which is right here, and save, it's coming from the bottom this time. Before it was coming from the top. So it's all about your preference. I like it coming from the top personally, like this. Now these images, so now that that effect is done, and by the way, you can really play with when this stuff starts to animate in and fall into its final position by adjusting these values right here. You can adjust a different trigger, which is, in this case, it's just the H1, but it could be, you know, maybe the section itself. And also the start and end values. So I've definitely covered scroll trigger and these values more in depth. So just do a YouTube channel search for scroll trigger, and if you want more explanations about how that works, you can do so. Okay, now we want to get just some parallax on each of these images, because right now they're all just animating at the same speed, which is okay, but it's in this context of this type of project, it's a little bit more interesting to have them animate at different speeds. So that's parallax. So what we'll do, we already have the property where we're getting all of the images in which we want to specify this information. What we want to do though is we want to come back to each image and give it a custom data attribute, data hyphen, and those first 5 characters, data and then a hyphen, is required for a custom attribute. You have to add data hyphen and then whatever name you want it to be. We're just going to say speed. And for us, the speed is going to be a value, we're going to use negative values, which you can use, like -6. And then we'll paste this right here, and then we'll just play with these values. And you know, you could play with them and adjust them based on the results in the browser and how you want each of those 4 images, their speed to be impacted on the y-axis. Now, just adding this alone does nothing. We actually have to utilize that in JavaScript. So first, let's go ahead and give this a comment. This is our heading animation, and then down here, this will be image parallax. Okay, very simple. What we want to do, like I said, we have imgs for images, and we want to iterate through each one of those. So imgs for each. We're going to pass in the image as a reference, and we want to grab the speed, the data attribute that we just add, data hyphen speed. We want to grab the value for each one of the images that we're iterating over. So we're going to say const speed equals image dataset speed. So that's how you reference custom data attributes right here. Dataset, and then the name of the custom data attribute minus the data hyphen. You don't include that. It's just whatever is after it. After that, we're going to use gsap2 method. All right, so we're going to put the image. We're going to say y%. Oopsie, hold on. Y%. We're going to say speed. And we're going to multiply this by a factor. And you can do this optionally. We're going to do it by 50. And then we're also going to say ease is none. And we're going to do a scroll trigger on this because this is a scroll activated parallax animation. The trigger is going to be the image itself, which you can completely do. You could also do a start here, top, bottom. You don't have to put an end. And we do want to put scrub true because it's tied to the scroll and not a duration. So let's come down. We could see, if you take a look at these two here, how the top one is moving faster than the bottom one. And so you can really play around with these values. They're all pretty similar up here with the data set speed. Like for instance, negative, like the one that says -3, that's not going to move as much. But if we change this to something like 14, let's save it. I believe it's the one over here. You can see that it will move faster, a lot faster in relation to the other elements on the page. And that's how you control that. Now, what might be interesting as well is just to use that little negative option right here. I'm not sure what this is going to do, but if we add a negative or a minus right to the left of speed, okay, it's affecting it, except in the opposite direction, especially this one down here. I wouldn't advise using that. But nonetheless, this is the actual project. Very, very, very cool stuff.